I remember the exact moment my world shifted. He leaned back in his designer chair, swirling his glass of scotch, and said with a smirk, "You couldn't live without me." The words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be, but they cut deeper than any scream ever could. The laughter of our guests echoed around the room, oblivious to the storm that had settled in my chest. FOMO washed over me in waves. In that instant, I felt small, replaceable, invisible. I tried to mask it with a polite smile, nodding along as he continued to boast about his achievements, his investments, and the social circles he so carefully curated. I caught a few sympathetic glances from distant relatives, but even their eyes couldn't stop the sting. How could someone I had loved and trusted reduce me to a mere footnote in my own life? Yet beneath the hurt, a spark flickered, subtle, almost imperceptible. He didn't know the nights I stayed up reading about business, investments, and strategies that could rival his empire. He didn't know about the plans I had sketched on the backs of napkins, the ideas I had quietly tested while he slept or ignored me at brunches. My intelligence, my potential, he had underestimated them all. I swallowed hard, keeping my composure while my mind raced. That casual dismissal, that cruel assumption of dependence, was the very thing that lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. He believed he had all the power, but for the first time, I began to realize that the power to rewrite my life was quietly, patiently, mine. That night, as the party carried on around me, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air, I made a silent promise. He would never see it coming. I would prove him wrong, not through confrontation, but through results. Through a life built on my terms, my intelligence, my resilience. He thought I couldn't live without him. He had no idea how quickly I would learn to live better than him. On the outside, our life looked perfect. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, the closets overflowed with designer clothes, and our social calendar was packed with galas, charity events, and elite dinners. Friends and acquaintances envied us, or so they thought. They didn't see the weight behind the glitter, the constant surveillance disguised as concern. I lived in luxury, yes, but it felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Every decision, every move I made was scrutinized. My husband controlled the finances with an invisible leash. Even something as simple as picking a dress for a dinner required his approval. Too expensive, he'd say, even when it was a gift he had promised. "Are you sure you want to wear that?" It doesn't really match the crowd. The subtle digs piled up like invisible bricks, each one reinforcing the message. I was dependent, incapable, secondary. Socially, I had no real voice. He introduced me with his grandiose titles and accomplishments, while my own achievements, my degrees, my small projects, the nights I spent studying and learning, were never mentioned. "Let me handle this," he'd interject at every conversation, brushing off my suggestions as if they were trivial. The humiliation wasn't dramatic, but it was constant, like a soft, steady pressure on my chest that made me question myself every single day. Even at home, there was little reprieve. The house was filled with opulence, but also with invisible walls. Invitations to family gatherings, private parties, even simple dinners, were dictated by him. I wasn't allowed to manage our schedule or entertain without his oversight. My desires, my opinions, my sense of independence, they were constantly deferred, delayed, dismissed. And yet, there was a quiet defiance growing inside me. I observed, I remembered, I cataloged every microaggression, every glance of condescension, every moment where he assumed I couldn't handle life without him. The wealth, the parties, the sparkling lights, it all felt suffocating. Yes, but it also revealed something vital. If I could survive in this cage, if I could endure his control and subtle cruelty, then perhaps one day I could escape it entirely. On my own terms. Late at night, when the chandeliers had dimmed and the house finally fell silent, I would retreat to the study. My husband's laughter and footsteps faded down the hall, leaving me alone with the soft glow of my laptop and a growing, restless heartbeat. It was in those stolen hours that I began to dream, not of diamonds or vacations, but of independence, of a life that belonged solely to me. I started small, reading articles about startups, investments, and financial strategies that didn't require his approval or validation. Each page I turned was a tiny act of rebellion. I bookmarked business opportunities and studied market trends, my mind buzzing with possibilities. Could I really do this? Could I actually build something on my own? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. Sometimes I would glance at the framed photos on the wall, us at charity galas, smiling for the cameras, the perfect life on display. He didn't know that behind the smiles, I was plotting a life he couldn't control. I imagined opening my own company, making decisions that no one else would question, investing in ventures he would never suspect. The thrill of autonomy pulsed through me like electricity. I experimented cautiously at first, small risks, minor investments, testing the waters while pretending to sip champagne at dinner parties. Every successful calculation, every little gain, was a whisper of freedom. I allowed myself to imagine the life I could lead if I truly stepped out from under his shadow. The thought of relying on myself, of proving that I didn't need him, made my chest swell with a dangerous mixture of hope and defiance. And yet, doubt crept in. What if he finds out? What if I fail? What if this destroys everything? But even in my fear, I couldn't silence the growing fire within me. Each hesitation only sharpened my resolve. I was no longer willing to accept a life dictated by someone else's ego and control. The cage may have been golden, but it was still a cage. And every night, in the quiet glow of my study, I began chiseling at the bars, preparing to step into a world where my own power, my intelligence, and my ambition would define me. The grand chandelier sparkled above us, reflecting the glittering gowns and polished tuxedos at the annual charity gala. I had spent hours choosing a dress I thought was elegant yet understated, hoping to make a quiet impression. But as soon as we arrived, he claimed my choice was all wrong for the occasion, loud enough for the nearest table to hear. A twinge of humiliation hit me, but I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. As the night wore on, the criticisms grew sharper. At the dinner table, he leaned toward the guests with a charming grin, boasting about his achievements, his investments, his influence. Then he glanced at me and added, "Of course, I wouldn't expect her to understand these things." Laughter rippled around the table. My cheeks burned and my chest tightened. I could feel the eyes of family and friends flicking toward me, some sympathetic, some amused. The sting of being dismissed, belittled, erased from the narrative of our lives in front of others, was unbearable. I caught myself clenching my fists under the table, reminding myself that outward composure was the only shield I had. He thinks this embarrasses me, but it only fuels me, I thought. Every dig, every smirk, every public microaggression chipped away at the carefully constructed persona he wanted to keep me trapped in. He had no idea that in these moments, I was cataloging every insult, every slight, every moment he underestimated me. By dessert, the humiliation had reached its peak. He interrupted my attempt to share a simple anecdote about a minor philanthropic project I had been working on, laughing dismissively. "That's cute, but leave the important decisions to the adults." "Darling." My heart sank, but somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited, a quiet, simmering defiance. The world might see me as small, as powerless, but they didn't see the fire building inside me. That night, as I excused myself to the restroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The dress, the jewelry, the perfectly styled hair, everything screamed wealth, status, and success on the surface. But behind my eyes, the storm was brewing. He may have humiliated me publicly tonight, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The higher he climbed on his pedestal, the harder he would fall when I finally stepped into the life he refused to let me have. That night, after the gala humiliation, I sat alone in our bedroom, the silence pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake. For years, I had been the quiet, compliant wife, the one who smiled when he dismissed me, who nodded when he decided everything for us, who whispered agreements while my own dreams were locked away. I remembered countless moments of weakness, the times I had convinced myself I couldn't survive without him. And yet, staring at the reflection of my tear-streaked face in the mirror, something shifted. A calm clarity replaced the panic and shame. "No more," I whispered to myself. "I will not be defined by his words, his control, or his arrogance." The helplessness that had dominated my life for so long was being replaced by something unfamiliar, but electrifying. resolve. I realized that everything he believed about me, that I couldn't function, couldn't make decisions, couldn't build my own life, was a lie. And I would prove it. The first act of rebellion didn't require confrontation or spectacle. It was subtle, calculated, and entirely within my control. I reached for my laptop, opened my spreadsheet of investments, and made a small but bold financial decision that he would never approve of, an allocation to a promising startup I had been researching in secret. My hands trembled with a mix of fear and exhilaration, but I clicked confirm and watched as the first step toward independence took root. In that quiet moment, I felt a shift in power. For the first time in years, I had done something entirely on my own. I had taken control of my life and my future, silently reclaiming a piece of the autonomy he had tried so hard to strip from me. The contrast between the wife who had been meek, obedient, and dependent, and the woman now sitting in the quiet of the night, confident in her first act of defiance, could not have been starker. It was a small victory, almost imperceptible to the outside world, but inside me, it roared. He thought he had all the power, but the scales were beginning to tip, and as I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection again, a slow, triumphant smile formed on my lips. The game had changed, and he had no idea that the quiet, obedient wife he thought he knew was already planning her empire. Weeks of late nights, careful research, and calculated risks finally began to pay off. The small investment I had made in that startup, a venture no one in my circle had taken seriously, was already showing returns. My heart raced as I refreshed the portfolio dashboard for the third time that morning, disbelief mingling with a rush of exhilaration. I did this. I actually did this. The words echoed in my mind like a secret anthem. For years I had been told what I could or couldn't do, mocked for my ambitions, and made to feel small. And now, here I was, holding tangible proof that I was not only capable, but brilliant in ways he had consistently underestimated. The numbers on the screen weren't just financial gains. They were tiny monuments to my independence, stepping stones toward a life built entirely on my terms. I allowed myself a quiet celebration, a moment of unguarded joy that he would never witness. I imagined telling him, watching the smugness drain from his face as he realized I didn't need him, not for guidance, not for validation, not for survival. But more than that, I felt a deeper sense of pride. This success wasn't flashy or public. It wasn't about humiliating him. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under his control for too long. Even as I relished this first victory, my mind was already racing ahead. This was only the beginning. Each small triumph would build upon the last, forming the foundation of the empire I was destined to create. The disbelief wasn't just from the returns themselves. It was from the realization that I had taken the first steps toward freedom and had proven to myself that I could succeed on my own. In that quiet office, surrounded by the hum of my laptop, I felt an unfamiliar sense of power, one that was steady, deliberate, and entirely mine. The husband who had once said I couldn't live without him could no longer dictate the trajectory of my life. And as I sipped my tea and watched the small numbers climb higher, I felt a surge of anticipation. If this was just the beginning, then the world had no idea what I was capable of. Just when I thought the path to independence was clear, reality reminded me that the world doesn't hand out victories without resistance. One of my trusted business partners, a person I had quietly relied on for guidance, made a reckless decision that jeopardized our small investment. I discovered it the morning of a critical financial report. A mismanaged account, miscommunications, and worse, the suspicion that some of it had been intentional. My heart sank as I scrolled through the figures, each number stabbing me with disbelief and fear. For the first time since I began this journey, I felt that old familiar panic creeping back in. The fear of failure, the fear of being inadequate, the fear that I couldn't survive without him after all. Am I really cut out for this? I whispered to myself, my hands trembling. I had built my confidence slowly, step by step, but now it felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Every imagined victory, every careful calculation, seemed to be slipping through my fingers. The humiliation wasn't public this time, but it cut just as deeply. I had shared my plans with someone I trusted, only to have that trust shattered. The betrayal gnawed at me, reminding me of all the ways my husband had once controlled and underestimated me. And yet this time, I wasn't being controlled. This was my life, my responsibility, and now my first real test. I paced the quiet office, clutching my head, torn between anger, despair, and a flicker of determination. Do I walk away? Do I let this crush me? The temptation to surrender to the comfort of dependence, the life I had always known, was almost overwhelming. But in the back of my mind, a stubborn voice refused to be silenced. You didn't come this far to give up now. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my reflection in the darkened monitor staring back at me. Everything hung in the balance. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and all of this, the promise of independence, the thrill of proving him wrong, could collapse. The night stretched endlessly, and as I sat alone, the storm of doubt raged around me. But somewhere in the shadows of fear, a seed of resolve remained. I had a choice: crumble under betrayal or rise stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. The question lingered, heavy and urgent. Will I quit or will I fight? I didn't expect help to come from anyone, let alone someone outside my immediate circle. But one rainy afternoon, as I sat hunched over my laptop nursing the sting of my recent setback, a message appeared in my inbox. It was from Eleanor, a successful entrepreneur I had met briefly at a networking event months ago. Her words were simple but electrifying. I hear you're ready to take control. Let me show you how to turn the tide. Skeptical but desperate, I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe. When I walked in, I found her already seated, radiating a calm confidence that made my own anxiety flare and fade at the same time. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Instead, she laid out the hard truths about risk, strategy, and resilience. I listened intently, absorbing every word, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within me. For the first time in weeks, I could see a path forward. Eleanor didn't just offer advice. She showed me a framework, a way to turn even small investments into powerful leverage. She asked questions that forced me to think critically, to trust my judgment, and to recognize my own instincts. You've been underestimating yourself, she said, leaning forward. Everything you need to succeed is already inside you. You just have to act with conviction. Her words struck me like a lightning bolt. For the first time, I realized that independence wasn't just about money or status. It was about mindset. The fire that had flickered inside me during my late-night research sessions now burned brighter. I began sketching new strategies, mapping out ventures that were smart, bold, and entirely my own. By the end of our meeting, I felt lighter, sharper, and more determined than ever. Eleanor didn't just offer hope. She handed me the tools to reclaim my life. Walking back through the drizzle, I felt a sense of power that had nothing to do with my husband's wealth or influence. For the first time, I understood. The journey wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could thrive on my own. And in that realization, I felt the first taste of true freedom. Armed with Eleanor's guidance and my renewed sense of purpose, I dove headfirst into building my empire. Every decision, every investment was calculated, precise, and intentional. I wasn't reckless. I had learned the hard way that even a small misstep could unravel months of progress. But I also trusted my instincts, the quiet confidence that had been simmering inside me for years, now ignited into a roaring determination. I started expanding my small venture, carefully selecting opportunities that showcased both innovation and sustainability. I reached out to potential partners, leveraged networks I had long ignored, and negotiated deals with a blend of charm and assertiveness that surprised even me. Every handshake, every contract signed, every milestone achieved, felt like another step away from the cage I had lived in for so long. The contrast between my rising power and his arrogance was palpable. My husband continued his lavish lifestyle, flaunting wealth and influence as if those alone defined him. Yet while he relied on status and superficial control, I was building something that couldn't be taken away: respect, competence, and real influence. I could see it in the way investors listened intently when I spoke, how colleagues sought my advice, and how my reputation grew quietly but steadily. Each success deepened my sense of empowerment. I remembered the nights he told me I couldn't live without him. The subtle dismissals at parties, the control over every financial and social decision. Now, the irony was delicious. The woman he thought dependent and fragile was quietly surpassing him in intellect, strategy, and poise. I felt a thrill every time I realized he had no clue what I was building behind the scenes. Even the small moments were satisfying. His casual boasts at social gatherings, his smirks of superiority, all now contrasted with the quiet acknowledgement of my own competence that I felt in every fiber of my being. The tables were turning, almost imperceptibly at first, but with every calculated risk, every strategic move, the balance of power shifted further in my favor. By now, I no longer questioned my path. I had a plan, a vision, and the skills to execute it. The empire I was constructing wasn't just financial, it was personal, a tangible testament to the woman I had become. And deep down, I knew that the day he realized it, the shock and disbelief would be sweet vindication for every slight, every humiliation, every word he had ever used to make me feel small. The night of the annual charity gala arrived, and I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, laughter, and the murmur of influential voices. My husband stood at the center, effortlessly commanding attention, dressed in his tailored tuxedo, radiating arrogance. He believed he owned the room, the social circle, and of course, me. I, however, had a different kind of power tonight. I had prepared meticulously, not just my outfit, but my presence, my confidence, and the subtle aura of authority I had cultivated over the past months. As I entered, heads turned, not just for my appearance, but for the quiet magnetism that accompanied me. I noticed a few familiar faces exchange glances of admiration, whispers of intrigue traveling across the room. Who is she? The first test came when a group of investors I had once feared approaching sought me out, asking questions about my ventures, eager for advice and insight. I spoke with poise, intelligence, and charm, casually dropping details of deals that were already reshaping my growing empire. Their eyes widened, their respect apparent, and for the first time, I felt the sweet thrill of recognition without him taking credit for my accomplishments. Across the room, my husband noticed the shift immediately. His confident smile faltered as he saw heads turn toward me, as colleagues leaned in to hear what I had to say. He opened his mouth to interject, but the moment had passed. This time I didn't need his approval or validation. I was no longer the timid, obedient wife he had believed I was. The power had quietly, inexorably shifted. A whispered compliment from a prominent philanthropist caught his attention, and I saw it, the flicker of shock in his eyes. He had underestimated me as always, and in that instant, I realized something thrilling. I didn't need to humiliate him publicly to feel victorious. The recognition of my own competence, the admiration of a room he thought he controlled, was far sweeter. By the end of the evening, I walked past him with a calm, triumphant smile. The tables had turned. For the first time, the world, not just our home, not just private life, witnessed that the woman he thought couldn't survive without him was thriving. And the seed of his disbelief, planted in his eyes that night, would grow into the perfect storm of vindication yet to come. Months of relentless focus, calculated risks, and strategic partnerships had brought me to this point. My ventures had grown beyond my initial expectations, profitable, influential, and undeniably independent. The empire I had quietly built while he flaunted superficial wealth and influence now eclipsed his own holdings. Every deal, every investment, every carefully nurtured connection was a silent testament to my strength. I didn't just survive, I thrived. The first time he truly realized the shift, it happened in the most mundane of ways. He casually mentioned a gala, boasting about a donation his company had made, expecting admiration from our circle. I simply smiled and mentioned my latest acquisition, a company he had laughed off months ago, now fully under my control, already reshaping the industry. The room went quiet for a fraction of a second, and I caught the flicker in his eyes, shock, disbelief, and something else, fear. He tried to dismiss it. masking his reaction with a casual laugh, but I could see it. He understood finally that I no longer needed him. The words he once wielded as a weapon, "You couldn't live without me," echoed hollowly in my mind, replaced now by a sense of triumph so sweet it almost made me dizzy. The power balance had shifted completely, and I had orchestrated it quietly, meticulously, and without a single misstep. This wasn't about revenge in the dramatic public sense. It was about something far more satisfying, the knowledge that I could thrive, excel, and command respect entirely on my own. I held the proof in numbers, influence, and the growing recognition of my peers. Investors sought my advice, colleagues deferred to me, and even his closest associates now regarded me with a newfound respect he could neither control nor reclaim. The contrast between us could not have been starker. He, still clinging to arrogance, to status symbols, to the illusion of control. Me, calm, confident, and fully independent, walking through life with a quiet authority that no amount of wealth or social manipulation could undermine. The empire was mine, not just in finance, but in every subtle measure of power, influence, and self-respect. That evening, when I entered a high-profile networking event without him, heads turned. People approached me, seeking guidance, collaboration, and connection. And as I watched from across the room, my husband lingered near the corner, forced to witness the truth he had long denied. I was no longer his dependent. I was not just surviving without him. I was thriving beyond him. It was a quiet, undeniable victory, a checkmate he couldn't undo. For the first time, I felt entirely free, entirely empowered, and entirely myself. The cage of wealth, control, and humiliation that had defined my life for so long had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the very hands he had thought weak. And in that realization, I finally understood the intoxicating taste of true independence. It was late evening when he finally cornered me in the study, his usual arrogance etched into every line of his face. "I see you've been busy," he said, voice dripping with that familiar condescension. "Building what exactly? Another little project you'll fumble?" I looked up from my desk, calm and composed, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Actually," I replied evenly, "I've been building a company. One that's profitable, influential, and entirely mine." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Mine, really? And here I thought you couldn't make a decision without me. Tell me, did you finally realize how small your efforts are compared to mine?" I didn't flinch. "You always underestimated me. But as it turns out, the skills you dismissed, the ideas you ignored, and the late nights you mocked, those were exactly what allowed me to succeed." He frowned, stepping closer, his voice lowering with frustration. "Do you honestly think a few numbers and partnerships make you independent? You need me, whether you admit it or not." I leaned back in my chair, eyes steady, voice controlled but firm. "No, I don't need you. Not your money, your approval, or your control. I've built something you can't touch, something that reflects my intelligence, my strategy, and my persistence. You thought I was weak, dependent, and powerless, but I'm stronger than you imagined," he snapped, anger rising in his tone. "You think this gives you the right to—" "I'm not asking for a right," I interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm showing you a fact. I am no longer yours to control. The life you tried to dictate, I've reclaimed it, and I've built something far beyond what you ever allowed me to imagine." His mouth opened, then closed, searching for a comeback that didn't exist. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, the shock, the disbelief, the helplessness. Every word he had used to belittle me echoed hollowly, replaced by the undeniable truth. I had surpassed him, and nothing he could say would change it. Finally I stood, my posture confident, unyielding. "You taught me a lot, actually. Not what to do, but what not to be. And now I am exactly who I'm meant to be. Independent, respected, untouchable." I left the room, leaving him standing there, speechless and small. For the first time in years, I felt the intoxicating thrill of true triumph. Not loud, not flashy, but complete and undeniable. Sitting in my office one quiet evening, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The empire I had built wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet or partnerships on paper. It was proof of everything I had discovered about myself along the way. For years, I had been silenced, controlled, and underestimated. Now I was seen, respected, and completely independent. I thought back to the nights I spent alone, researching, calculating, and dreaming while he flaunted his control and influence. I remembered the humiliation at social events, the subtle dismissals, and the moments I had questioned my own worth. Each challenge, each slight, had been a stepping stone. Painful, yes, but essential. They forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. The lessons were clear. I learned that independence is more than financial security. It is the confidence to trust your own instincts, the courage to act when fear whispers stay small, and the patience to build quietly while others underestimate you. I learned that true empowerment comes not from defeating someone else, but from discovering your own resilience. I smiled at the irony. The husband who once declared I couldn't live without him had unknowingly provided the fuel I needed to rise. Every dismissive comment, every attempt to control me, every humiliation had pushed me closer to the life I now claimed fully. I had turned his underestimation into my advantage, and the satisfaction was deeper than any revenge could have been. Looking out the window at the city lights, I felt a calm pride. I had proven something profound, not just to him, but to myself, that I was capable of creating my own destiny, thriving in ways he could never anticipate. I didn't just survive, I flourished. And as I sipped my tea, reflecting on the journey, I knew the most important truth of all. I had built my life, my empire, my independence, and no one, not even him, could take it away. I was finally free, fully myself, and more powerful than I had ever imagined. Even now, as I sit in my office reviewing the latest growth reports, I feel a thrill I never expected. My empire is thriving, but it isn't just about what I've achieved. It's about what's still ahead. Every deal, every partnership, every carefully considered risk is a stepping stone toward something bigger, bolder, and more extraordinary. I've learned that success isn't a single moment. It's a journey, one that requires vision, courage, and the willingness to act when others doubt you. And while I've already surpassed expectations, both mine and his, I know that this is only the beginning. There are ventures yet unexplored, challenges yet untested, and opportunities waiting for someone willing to take them. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at the thought of it. The projects I haven't announced, the ideas I've been nurturing, quietly, the milestones that will one day make people say, "How did she do that?" It's a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing your power isn't just visible, it's enduring. And I realize that the most exciting part isn't just the success itself, it's the freedom to choose it. I am no longer defined by anyone else's expectations, limitations, or control. I create the rules, I decide the path, I set the pace, and the possibilities are endless. So, yes, this story is far from over. I have learned, grown, and reclaimed my life. But there's still so much more to conquer. I want the world to watch, not because I need validation, but because the journey itself is worth sharing. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there reading this is inspired to take their first step, to challenge what they thought was impossible, and to realize their own potential. The truth is simple. I built my life once, and I will continue to rise. Higher, smarter, stronger. And as I do, I hope my story sparks something in others. The courage to reclaim their power, to create their own path, and to embrace the thrill of becoming unstoppable. Watch closely. The best is yet to come.